39. The harvest is the end of the world. This is, no doubt, a very distressing consideration, that the Church is burdened with the reprobate to the very end of the world, but Christ enjoins on us to exercise patience till that time, that we may not deceive ourselves with a vain hope. Pastors ought to labor strenuously to purify the Church, and all the godly, so far as their respective callings enable them, ought to lend assistance in this matter, but when all shall have devoted their united exertions to the general advantage, they will not succeed in such a manner as to purify the Church entirely from every defilement. Let us therefore hold, that nothing was farther from the design of Christ than to encourage pollution by lending countenance to it. All that he intended was, to exhort those who believed in him not to lose courage, because they are under the necessity of retaining wicked men among them, and, next, to restrain and moderate the zeal of those who fancy that they are not at liberty to join in a society with any but pure angels. This passage has been most improperly abused by the Anabaptists, and by others like them, to take from the Church the power of the sword. But it is easy to refute them, for since they approve of excommunication, which cuts off, at least for a time, the bad and reprobate, why may not godly magistrates, when necessity calls for it, use the sword against wicked men? They reply that, when the punishment is not capital, there is room allowed for repentance, as if the thief on the cross, Luke 23:42, did not find the means of salvation. I shall satisfy myself with replying, that Christ does not now speak of the office of pastors or of magistrates, but removes the offense which is apt to disturb weak minds, when they perceive that the Church is composed not only of the elect, but of the polluted dregs of society. The reapers are the angels. This term must be viewed in reference to the present subject. In another passage, the apostles are called reapers, as compared with the prophets, because they have entered into their labors, John 4:38, and it is enjoined on all the ministers of the word, that they should bring forth fruit, and that their fruit should remain, John 15:16. Such also is the import of that statement, that the fields are white, and are in want of reapers, John 4:35, and again, that the harvest is abundant, but the laborers are few. Matthew 9:37. But here the comparison is applied in a different manner, for those who occupy a place in the Church are said to be planted in the Lord's field. Nor is this inconsistent with what is said elsewhere, that Christ, as soon as he comes forth with his gospel, hath a winnowing fan in his hand, and will thoroughly cleanse his thrashing floor, Matthew 3:12. These words describe the commencement of that cleansing, which, this passage declares, will not take place before the last day, because not till then will it be fully completed. Christ will put the last hand to the cleansing of the Church by means of angels, but he now begins to do the work by means of pious teachers. He assigns this office to angels, because they will not remain idle spectators before his tribunal, but will hold themselves in readiness to execute his commands. It follows, that those who proceed, with undue haste, to root out whatever displeases them, prevent, as far as lies in their power, the sentence of Christ, deprive angels of their office, and rashly take that office on themselves. 41. They shall gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks, the words that follow, and those who commit iniquity, are added for the sake of exposition, for it is not intended to point out two different things, but to state, that then will be the full and seasonable time, when all things shall be restored to regular order, and when the wicked shall be removed, who are now stumbling blocks. They are so called, because not only are their own lives wicked, but they undermine the faith of many, retard others in the right course, draw some entirely aside, and drive others headlong. We ought to draw from this a useful admonition, not to become indolent and careless on account of our being surrounded by so many stumbling blocks, but to be zealous and active in guarding against them. It reproves also the effeminacy of those who are so delicate, that the smallest possible stumbling blocks make them turn back. It is difficult, I admit, not to stumble frequently, and even sometimes to fall, when stumbling blocks without number lie across our path. But our minds ought to be fortified with confidence, for the Son of God, who commands his followers to walk in the midst of stumbling blocks, will unquestionably give us strength to overcome them all. He pronounces likewise an awful punishment against any hypocrites and reprobate persons, who now appear to be the most distinguished citizens of the Church. 46. And bought it. By the word by Christ does not mean that men bring any price, with which they may purchase for themselves the heavenly life, for we know on what condition the Lord invites believers in the book of Isaiah, 55:1, "Come and buy wine and milk without money and without price." But though the heavenly life, and everything that belongs to it, is the free gift of God, yet we are said to buy it, when we cheerfully relinquish the desires of the flesh, that nothing may prevent us from obtaining it, as Paul says, that he reckoned all things to be loss and dung, that he might gain Christ. Philippians 3:8. 47. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net. No new instruction is here given by Christ, but what he formerly taught is confirmed by another parable, that the Church of God, so long as it exists in the world, is a mixture of the good with the bad, and is never free from stains and pollutions. And yet the design of this parable is perhaps different. It may be that Christ intends not only to remove the offense which perplexes many weak minds, because they do not find in the world all the purity that might be desired, but likewise to employ the influence of fear and modesty, in restraining his disciples from delighting themselves with the empty title, or mere profession, of faith. For my own part, I cheerfully adopt both views. Christ informs us that a mixture of the good and the bad must be patiently endured till the end of the word, because, till that time, a true and perfect restoration of the Church will not take place. Again, he warns us that it is not enough, and what is more that it is of little consequence to us, to be gathered into the fold, unless we are his true and chosen sheep. To this effect is the saying of Paul, "The Lord knoweth who are his, and let every one that calleth on the name of the Lord depart from iniquity." 2 Timothy 2:19. The preaching of the gospel is justly compared to a net sunk beneath the water, to inform us that the present state of the Church is confused. Our God is the God of order, and not of confusion. 1 Corinthians 14:33. And, therefore, recommends to us discipline, but he permits hypocrites to remain for a time among believers, till the last day, when he will bring his kingdom to a state of perfection. So far as lies in our power, let us endeavor to correct vices, and let us exercise severity in removing pollutions, but the Church will not be free from every spot and blemish, until Christ shall have separated the sheep from the goats. Matthew 25:32.